Okay, let's unpack this. We are diving into a stack of your sources on, well, one of the most brutal and strategically vital confrontations of the early Second World War, the Siege of Tobruk.
Absolutely. It's a fascinating and frankly harrowing story.
This is the story of a 231-day furnace, really, a dusty port that just absolutely refused to fall. And the immense cost of halting General Lieutenant Erwin Rommel's initial sweep across North Africa.
It was definitely more than just a siege. It was a defining military moment, you could say.
Yeah.
This whole confrontation, running from April 10th right through to November 27, 1941, it fundamentally derailed the Axis push towards the Suez Canal.
Right.
And for anyone trying to understand the North Africa campaign, the key strategic point here is all about location, location, location.
Yeah.
Tobruk was the only decent port between Benghazi and Alexandria.
And holding it was the critical factor, wasn't it? Keeping Tobruk out of Rommel's hands denied him that crucial forward supply hub.
Exactly. It crippled his ability to advance quickly, to sustain those motorized divisions.
Yeah, it forced his supply lines, which were already stretched incredibly thin, to haul everything, fuel, water, ammo, over just immense distances. The desert itself became a massive obstacle for him because of Tobruk.
And the defenders inside? Who were they exactly?
Well, it was a real mix, a multinational force. Initially, it was centered on the very disciplined 9th Australian Division.
Okay.
But later they were bolstered and eventually replaced by the British 70th Division. And you also had crucial support from the Polish Carpathian Independent Rifle Brigade troops and the Czechoslovak 11th Infantry Battalion, too.
So a real coalition effort.
Absolutely. And they weren't just sitting there hunkering down, they were fighting back. Actively.
And it's that sheer tenacity, isn't it? Especially the Australians who took the brunt of those first assaults. That's where the nickname came from, right? The Rats of Tobruk.
That's the one. It was actually meant as an insult, broadcast by Axis propaganda, Axis Sally, and the like.
Trying to demoralize them. Yeah, paint them as being trapped like rats.
Oh.
But the soldiers, they just grabbed it immediately.
Yeah.
Turned it into a badge of honor, a symbol of defiance.
Ah, I love that.
It really captures that spirit, doesn't it? Dug into the earth, refusing to be pushed out.
Okay, so to really get this story, you first have to picture the scene, the arena. This wasn't like the war in Western Europe at all.
Not even close.
This was the Western Desert, an incredibly unforgiving environment. It was as much an enemy as Rommel's tanks, wouldn't you say?
Oh, without a doubt. The battlefield itself stretched, about 390 kilometers wide? A mix of that stony Syri desert and then the soft sand seas further south. Just a logistical nightmare from the start.
And the environment dictated absolutely everything.
Everything. The main supply route, the coastal road, the Via Balbia, that was the only paved road. But even that wasn't totally reliable. It could flood during those sudden, rare downpours.
Wow.
And beyond the enemy troops, the soldiers faced just constant hardship. You had deadly scorpions, vipers everywhere, disease carried by swarms of flies. And maybe worst of all, that wind. The Sirocco.
Yeah, the Sirocco sounds absolutely horrific. The sources describe it just choking everything, reducing visibility to a few meters sometimes.
Yeah, turning the air into this abrasive cloud of fine sand that got into everything. Food, weapons, engines, lungs.
So that environmental wear and tear, the attrition, it must have been devastating, especially for tanks and trucks.
It was brutal. And you see it in the data we have. Rommel's already difficult supply chain. It was made so much worse by mechanical failures caused by the conditions.
Right.
German tank engines, which you'd normally expect to last, say, 1,400 to 1,600 miles.
Yeah.
In the desert heat and grit, their lifespan plummeted, sometimes down to only 300 to 900 miles.
Wow, that's a massive drop.
Huge. That stress started long before they even saw combat. And remember, Tobruk was 1,100 miles away from Tripoli, the main Axis supply port.
It just sets the stage perfectly for the siege, doesn't it? Because earlier in 41, the Allies had actually had great success with Operation Compass.
They had captured huge amounts of Italian territory, thousands of prisoners.
But that success kind of led to a critical mistake, strategically. A lot of the experienced British Western Desert Force, the WDF, got diverted, sent off to Greece and Syria.
That's right, leaving behind what the sources really accurately call a skeleton force. Not much left to hold that massive frontage.
And Hitler saw his chance.
He saw the vacuum, yeah. He sent reinforcements, the newly formed Deutsches Afrika Korps, under, the command of the incredibly aggressive and, let's face it, brilliant Erwin Rommel. And Rommel didn't wait around. He launched Operation Sonnenblume, Operation Sunflower in the spring of 41.
And just swept the Allies back.
Drove the depleted Allied forces back 300 miles, right up to the Egyptian border. leaving Tobruk as this lone, isolated Allied island in a sea of Axis control.
So let's talk about the defenses they were actually holding. What did the Allies inherit there in Tobruk? It wasn't exactly the Maginot Line, was it?
No, definitely not. It wasn't a modern, purpose-built fortress. Tobruk had been an Italian garrison until the Allies captured it back in January 41.
Okay.
So the defenses were extensive, yes, but they were also in pretty serious disrepair.
How extensive?
Well, there was an outer perimeter, about 30 miles long. It was basically a continuous line, a double semicircle of small, dug-in strong points, often with concrete walls, good observation posts looking forward.
Sounds okay on paper.
It does. But here's the weakness Rommel really hoped to exploit. The crucial inner anti-tank ditch. It was unfinished in many sections. And the barbed wire the Italians had left behind was generally old, rusty, falling apart. It looked formidable on a map, maybe, but up close, pretty fragile.
But the Allied commander, Leslie Morshead, he had a specific approach, didn't he? It wasn't just about sitting behind the wire.
No, absolutely not.
Yeah.
Morshead's mindset really compensated for those material shortcomings. He instituted a policy that defined the entire siege. Active defense.
Active defense. What did that mean in practice?
He told his battalions, and remember, they were stretched thin, sometimes covering 5-mile frontages each. He told them to expect the Germans to break through the perimeter.
Okay, expect the breach.
Expect it. But he was absolutely explicit. Any break-in must be eliminated immediately by counterattack. There would be, and this is the key phrase, no withdrawal.
Wow. That's laying it on the line.
It totally committed the garrison psychologically right from the very start. Endurance was baked into the plan. Hashtag B, the first assaults and holding the line. So the investment, the surrounding of Tobruk, it began properly on April 10th. Rommel, smelling blood, sensing maybe a quick victory.
Yeah.
He ordered a fast dash toward the Suez Canal, leaving his 5th Light Division and the Italian 27th Brescia Division to just quickly isolate Tobruk and, he hoped, neutralize it.
So the first test of Morshead's active defense came pretty much straight away.
Almost immediately, April 11th and 12th. The German 5th Panzer Regiment started probing the defenses along the El Adem Road. That sector was held by the 20th Australian Brigade.
And this is where the defenders showed they weren't just going to sit there and take it.
Exactly. The Panzers were actually held off by really well-aimed Allied artillery fire. They were using the 25-pounder field guns, almost like giant anti-tank rifles, in a direct fire role. Very effective. And when the German infantry tried to follow up, tried to advance towards that dodgy anti-tank ditch, they were just driven back by intense machine gun and rifle fire. Cut down.
So the initial probe failed. What did Rommel do then?
Well, Rommel seemed convinced the garrison was weak, probably about to evacuate by sea, so he decided to gamble. He ordered a dramatic high-speed night attack. The plan was to punch through and secure the harbor before sunrise.
Okay, now here's where it gets really interesting. According to the sources, this is the night of April 13th, going into the 14th.
That's the one. A critical night. The 5th Light Division did manage to push a breach. They got a small bridgehead established, and the 5th Panzer Regiment drove straight through this gap, aiming right for the heart of the port. The plan was to split their column. One part secures the harbor, the other blocks any imagined British escape route.
But they drove right into, what, an ambush?
Pretty much a pre-sighted lethal trap. As the German tanks advanced, they were first engaged head-on by the guns of the 1st Royal Horse Artillery.
Okay.
When they tried to veer away from that main barrage, they suddenly ran into British cruiser tanks, Crusaders, mostly waiting hull down.
Hull down. Explain that for people listening.
It's a brilliant defensive tactic. You position your tank behind a ridge or crest line so that only the turret and the gun are exposed to the enemy. The much more vulnerable hull is protected by the terrain.
Got it. So they were hidden and protected.
Exactly. And armed with those punchy 2-pounder anti-tank guns, the Panzers suddenly find themselves taking fire from the front and now also from the flank.
From 3 sides, the sources say.
Yeah, concentrated anti-tank fire from 3 different directions. It was devastating for them.
A bloodbath, you called it?
It really was for the attackers. Yeah. The 5th Panzer Regiment lost 16 of its 38 tanks in that single engagement. 16 tanks knocked out, just like that.
Yeah.
Their armored thrust was stopped cold.
And the infantry support.
The supporting German infantry, the 8th Machine Gun Battalion, they got pinned down and basically annihilated. They suffered 75% losses. Their commander was killed. Just devastated.
And the defenders' losses?
Minimal by comparison. The sources say 26 killed, 64 wounded. That single night action, that failed gamble, was the moment Rommel must have realized this wasn't going to be some quick, opportunistic win. Tobruk was going to fight.
And if that wasn't enough to convince him, he tried again just 2 days later, this time from the west.
He did. On April 16th, he committed the Italian Ariete Armored Division, reinforced with bits of the Trento Division, near a place called Ras el Medauar.
And how did that go?
Again, the response from the garrison was fierce and immediate. The 248th Australian Battalion launched a really well-executed localized counterattack, completely repulsed the Italian assault. And not only that, the Australians captured a huge haul of prisoners, 803 Italians taken captive.
Wow, 803 prisoners in one go.
Yeah. These initial sharp defeats really forced the Axis command, Rommel included, to shift strategy immediately. They had to accept this wasn't going to be a blitzkrieg rush job. It was going to be a prolonged, costly siege.
And Morsad's active defense was proving its worth.
Absolutely. The garrison immediately started exploiting the Axis disorganization after these failures. They sent out patrols, launched small sorties. Like that raid on April 22nd destroyed 2 enemy guns, captured another 370 prisoners, keeping the pressure on.
So the siege now settles into this long, grinding phase. The initial shock attacks had failed, but the Axis objective remained the same. Tobruk had to be taken.
That's right. And the Axis High Command, both the German OKW and the Italian Commando Supremo, they agreed. No more rush jobs. It required a deliberate, planned, sustained effort.
Which brings us to Rommel's next big gamble, perhaps the most significant German attempt to actually break the perimeter. The Battle of the Salient. End of April, early May.
Correct, between April 30th and May 3rd. Rommel concentrated his armored punch this time. He used the 5th Light Division and the newly arrived 15th Panzer Division. Focused the attack in the southwest sector, near that same area, Ras el Medauar.
And this time they did get through.
They did achieve a substantial penetration, a breach about 3 miles wide, and pushed about 2 miles deep into the Allied lines. That must have been a really terrifying moment for the defenders, seeing those tanks pouring through again.
I can imagine. But the Australian strong points, the ones that were bypassed, they didn't just surrender.
No, they held out, showing incredible grit. They kept firing into the flanks and rear of the advancing German columns, causing disruption and casualties.
And something else stopped the tanks. It wasn't just infantry this time.
No. It was planning and some quick engineering work. As the German panzers pushed eastwards deeper into this newly created salient, they drove directly into a newly laid Allied minefield.
Ah, clever.
Very. A combination of foresight and rapid work by the engineers. Once the tanks were immobilized by the mines, or at least slowed down and channeled,
they became targets.
Exactly. They were engaged by concealed Allied anti-tank guns and basically repulsed. Stopped again.
The sources talk about really confused fighting after that and a critical failure in the Allied counterattack attempt.
Yeah, the attempt to pinch off the base of this salient and restore the original perimeter line, it didn't quite work. The Australian 248th Battalion attacked again, bravely, but the 18th Australian Brigade, which was supposed to converge with them from a different direction.
They got lost or delayed.
They failed to coordinate properly in the darkness. It's a classic example of how difficult night maneuvers and coordinated attacks are, especially under pressure. The counterattack ultimately failed to fully restore the line. Part of the reason was the 18th Brigade had to pull back just before dawn. They couldn't risk being caught out in the open by German dive bombers and artillery when the sun came up.
So the garrison had to live with this bulge, this salient, in their lines.
They did. But the cost to the Axis of creating that salient and failing to exploit it further was just too high for them to sustain further attacks immediately.
What were the numbers on that?
This deliberate attack, the Battle of the Salient, cost the Axis forces around 650 German and 500 Italian casualties, a significant loss of trained men and experienced NCOs.
And the failure was stark enough to get attention from Berlin.
It was. Major General Friedrich Paulus, yes, that Paulus of Stalingrad fame later was actually sent from Berlin to assess Rommel's operations.
And his verdict.
He effectively forbade Rommel from launching any further major offensive attacks on Tobruk unless there was clear evidence the Allies were starting to evacuate.
Wow. That single command really underlines the massive strategic break Tobruk had become on the whole Africa Corps. It wasn't just a thorn in Rommel's side. It was altering grand strategy.
Absolutely. It tied down significant Axis forces and, crucially, continued to massively complicate their logistics. #D, the war above and the lifeline below, desert skies and naval war.
Let's zoom out again and connect this back to that bigger picture of the logistics. You mentioned it before, but every single day the siege went on, Rommel's supply problems just got worse and worse.
Exponentially worse. Think about it. If a single motorized division needed about 350 tons of supplies per day.
Right.
And those supplies had to be hauled 1,100 miles overland from Tripoli. I mean, the sheer number of trucks required is staggering. The sources estimate 1,172-ton lorries just to keep one division running.
And that's before accounting for fuel for the trucks themselves, breakdowns, attacks on the convoys.
Precisely. And this incredibly fragile supply line was constantly under threat, not just from Allied desert patrols, but also from the air. Even as the Axis air forces were simultaneously trying desperately to pound the port of Tobruk itself into submission.
So there was this parallel war raging in the skies over Tobruk.
Oh, yeah. A brutal and relentless struggle for air superiority. It was vital for both sides.
Who were the main players up there?
On the Axis side, you had Fliegerkorps X. This included elite German fighter wings like JG-27 Jagdgeschwader 27. Famous pilots like Marseille served with them later. They flew constant bombing and dive bombing sorties.
Using the Stukas.
Primarily the infamous Ju-87 Stukas, yes. Their sirens were terrifying. But also Ju-88 medium bombers and, of course, the excellent Briev 109 fighters providing escort and seeking air combat.
And on the Allied side, the RAF must have been under immense pressure.
Immense pressure and facing near-catastrophic attrition rates at times. The initial air defense was mainly provided by RAF Squadrons 73 and 274. Flying Hurricanes mostly.
And the losses were heavy.
Very heavy. One source mentions 31 Allied aircraft lost in just 1 month, May 1941. Pilot exhaustion was rampant. They were flying multiple sorties a day in appalling conditions.
And the strategic situation on the ground made it even harder for the RAF fighters, didn't it? Because the main British forces had been pushed so far back.
Exactly. During Sonnenblume, this meant the RAF fighter squadrons had to operate from airfields far back in Egypt. They had to fly long distances just to reach Tobruk.
Which meant less time over the target area.
Less time fighting, yeah. And often they had to refuel at intermediate landing grounds like Sidi Barrani, making them vulnerable.
So this gave the Axis pilots.
It gave the Luftwaffe and the Italian Regia Aeronautica what one commander apparently called a free hand over Tobruk. For critical periods during the day. They could attack the port and the ships with less fear of interception sometimes.
But despite those air superiority struggles, the defenses on the ground against air attack were still fierce.
Very fierce. The defenders had a significant number of anti-aircraft guns. The sources say 88 Ole guns in total. A mix of heavy 3.7-inch guns and lighter Bofors guns.
And they got smarter with their tactics, too.
They did. Initially, they might have fired a sustained barrage at a predicted altitude. But they learned. They changed tactics to create a staggered, thickened belt of fire that the Stukas had to fly through for longer.
Making those dive bombing runs much more dangerous.
Much more costly for the attackers, yes. And you have that fantastic anecdote. It really sums up the spirit. The sunk Royal Navy gunboat, HMS Ladybird.
Right. She was sunk in the harbor but sat upright on the bottom in shallow water.
Exactly. And her crew continued to man her 3-inch deck guns, using them as a fixed anti-aircraft battery. Just incredible determination.
Sheer grit. And while all this was happening in the air, down on the water, the most vital lifeline was running constantly, the Tobruk ferry service.
Absolutely critical. This constant high-stakes naval blockade run was the only thing keeping the garrison supplied and reinforced.
It was literally the difference between survival and surrender. The numbers involved are just incredible when you think about the danger.
They really are. Over the course of the siege, the Royal Navy and the Royal Australian Navy managed to evacuate nearly 50,000 personnel, mostly wounded, sick, or even prisoners of war being sent out.
And brought in fresh troops.
Brought in over 34,000 fresh troops, replacements. And crucially, almost 34,000 tons of essential stores, food, water, ammunition, medical supplies.
An astonishing feat of logistics under constant fire. But it must have come at a terrible cost to the Navy.
A terrifying cost. The sources confirm 34 ships were sunk outright during these runs. Another 33 were damaged, some severely.
What kinds of ships?
Destroyers, sloops, minesweepers, dedicated store carriers, even hospital ships weren't entirely safe. They faced danger not just from Axis artillery ringing the harbor, but especially from those relentless dive-bombing attacks.
So that naval commitment keeping Tobruk alive, it must have had wider strategic implications, tying up valuable warships.
Absolutely. It fundamentally restricted overall British naval strategy in the Eastern Mediterranean throughout 1941. Those ships were desperately needed elsewhere, like escorting Malta convoys. But Tobruk demanded priority. #TAGCHID, #E-night raids and patrols.
Now, that active defense wasn't just about shooting back when attacked. It was also about taking the fight to the enemy outside the perimeter, keeping them nervous.
Exactly. Aggressive patrolling and night raids were a key part of Moorehead's doctrine. It kept the Axis commanders constantly off balance, unsure of where the next small attack might come from.
But these raids didn't always go to plan, did they? The sources mentioned the Bardia raid in April 41.
Yeah, that one had mixed results, leaning towards failure, unfortunately. It was launched by A Battalion, Lay Force. These were some of the earliest British commandos.
And the objective?
The idea was to land behind enemy lines near Bardia, further down the coast, and disrupt Axis communication lines, maybe destroy some supply dumps. Classic commando-style operation.
But it sounds like it went wrong almost from the start.
It was a bit of a catalog of misfortune, really. Their guiding submarine, which was meant to signal the landing beaches, had to crash dive because it was mistakenly attacked by Allied aircraft.
Oh no, friendly fire.
Looks like it. So the initial canoe section landed late. Then the main force seems to have landed on the wrong beaches due to navigation errors and maybe faulty intelligence about coastal defenses.
So they missed their main targets.
They largely missed the key communication hubs they were after. It really highlighted the extreme difficulty of coordinating these complex amphibious operations, especially at night and under pressure.
Did they achieve anything?
They did manage to find and destroy an Italian supply dump, so not a total loss, but the cost was high. 70 commandos ended up being captured after getting lost and ending up on the wrong evacuation beach as dawn broke. A real blow to Lay Force early on.
So a costly failure in terms of objectives. But then there were successes too, like the Twin Pimples raid in July.
Yes, the Twin Pimples. That one became almost a textbook example of a successful, daring, small-scale local action. It really demonstrated the value of that aggressive patrolling and seizing opportunities.
What were the Twin Pimples?
There were two small, distinctive hills just outside the Allied perimeter, held by the Italians. They formed a strong point that gave the Axis really good forward observation over the Allied lines. A constant nuisance.
Okay, so the raid aimed to take them out.
Exactly. The operation involved a small force, just 43 men, some from No. 8 Commando, working closely with Australian engineers from the garrison. Planning was meticulous.
And they relied on surprise.
Surprise and speed. They advanced late one night, moving carefully through no man's land. The sources even mentioned the simple password they used, Jock.
Simple and effective.
They waited for a prearranged diversionary artillery barrage on nearby positions, and then, in the confusion, they rushed the Italian positions. Close quarters fighting, very swift.
And the engineers went straight to work.
Immediately. The Australian engineers planted explosives on the Italian mortars and ammunition stored in the strongpoint. Timing was absolutely critical.
Why critical?
Because they knew from intelligence and observation exactly when the Italians routinely shelled their own forward positions if they suspected they were under attack or captured standard operating procedure.
So they knew they had a very limited window.
Precisely. They estimated they had about 15 minutes after the initial capture before the Italian artillery would start plastering the Twin Pimples. The commandos and engineers got out just in time, apparently only about 100 yards away, as the heavy shelling rained down on the position they had just demolished.
Incredible timing. That must have been a huge morale boost for the garrison.
Immense. It showed they weren't just passively defending. They were offensively minded, capable of hitting the enemy hard, even on a small scale. It kept the Axis guessing and boosted the defenders' spirits.
Okay, so while the garrison inside Tobruk was holding on through sheer grit, active defense, and that vital sea link, the pressure was mounting on the British High Command outside to actually lift the siege.
Huge pressure, politically and militarily, which led to two major and ultimately disastrous relief attempts before Operation Crusader finally succeeded. These failures really reshaped the Allied leadership in the Middle East.
The first one was Operation Brevity in May 41.
That's right. Brevity was intended as a more limited offensive. The main goals were really to secure better tactical positions for a future larger offensive and maybe inflict some attrition on Rommel's forward units.
And it's failed.
It largely failed to achieve most of its objectives. In fact, the Allies quickly lost some of the key ground they'd initially taken, including the strategically important Hellfire Pass. The Germans counterattacked almost immediately in Operation Scorpion and took it back.
So Brevity showed the 8th Army wasn't quite ready for a showdown with Rommel yet.
Not yet. It was perhaps rushed, poorly planned, which sadly set the stage for the much larger failure of Operation Battleaxe in June.
Right, Battleaxe. This was the first really big, determined attempt to break through and relieve Tobruk.
It was a full-scale offensive, and it turned into a strategic catastrophe for the British. Just disastrous.
Why did it go so wrong?
Well, it seems Battleaxe was poorly conceived in terms of tactics and arguably poorly executed, too. It resulted in massive, immediate British tank losses. The figures are stark. 91 British tanks were either knocked out or broke down and had to be abandoned. Over 900 casualties.
How did Rommel manage that?
He masterfully used his combined arms doctrine. Crucially, he employed those powerful 88mm anti-aircraft guns, the Flak 88s, in an anti-tank role.
The infamous 88.
Exactly. He positioned them brilliantly in ambush positions, well dug in and camouflaged. The advancing British tank formations, often relying on their heavily armored but slow Matilda tanks, just failed to spot them or avoid them until it was too late.
And the faster German tanks.
The Panzer IIIs and Forfies were used more flexibly. They could evade the slower Matildas, draw them onto the hidden 88s, and then hit the lighter British cruiser tanks on the flanks. It was a tactical nightmare for the British commanders.
And the consequences were severe, politically.
Very severe. General Wavell, who was the overall commander-in-chief Middle East, was effectively sacked and swapped post with General Auchinleck in India. The corps commander for Battleaxe and the commander of the 7th Armored Division were also relieved of command.
So, heads rolled.
They did. The failure Battleaxe sent shockwaves back to London. It proved Rommel was a highly skilled opponent who couldn't just be beaten by throwing tanks at him. A new approach was needed.
And with these major relief attempts failing, what was happening with the original defenders inside Tobruk, particularly the Australians?
Well, by late summer 1941, the Australian government was becoming increasingly concerned. The 9th Australian Division had been in the thick of it for 5 brutal months.
It must have been exhausted. Health concerns.
Exactly. Concerns about the physical and mental health of the troops, the sheer fatigue after constant shelling, bombing, and fighting in those appalling conditions. They formally requested the withdrawal of the 9th Division.
Pulling out an entire division from a besieged port. That sounds incredibly risky.
It was a massive undertaking, a huge, high-risk troop movement, essentially a relief in place under the noses of the enemy.
How did they manage it?
It had to be done with extreme secrecy and speed. They used fast warships, destroyers, and cruisers, and conducted the entire operation only during moonless periods at night to minimize the ever-present risk of Axis air attacks on the ships in the harbor. It began in August 41.
A complex rotation.
Incredibly complex. Between August and October, the bulk of the Australian 9th Division was progressively pulled out, and coming in to replace them were fresh troops.
Who came in?
The British 70th Infantry Division arrived, along with it nearly 6,200 men of the Polish Carpathian Independent Rifle Brigade, battle-hardened soldiers who'd escaped Poland, and also the Czechoslovak 11th Infantry Battalion. Thousands of tons of supplies were also brought in during this rotation.
And command changed hands?
Yes. Command of the Tobruk garrison passed from the Australian Lieutenant General Leslie Morshead, who had been legendary, to the British Major General Ronald Scobie. This relief provided the garrison with fresh legs, fresh determination, while still preserving that immense strategic advantage of holding the port.
Okay, so the garrison is refreshed, if not entirely rested. The failures of Brevity and Battleaxe have been absorbed. New commanders are in place. This sets the stage for the final massive relief offensive, Operation Crusader.
That's it. Operation Crusader kicked off on November 18, 1941. This was a much larger, more complex plan than the previous attempt.
What was the core strategy?
Yeah, it was ambitious. The main force of the newly formed 8th Army, under General Cunningham initially, would advance from the southeast, aiming to engage and destroy the bulk of Rommel's Africa Corps out in the desert.
Okay, draw Rommel out.
Draw him out and defeat his armor. Meanwhile, the refreshed 70th Division garrison inside Tobruk would execute a dramatic breakout attack.
A breakout from Tobruk.
Yes. Time for November 21st. The plan was for them to punch out of the perimeter, push westwards, and slice directly through the Axis supply lines that ran along the coast road behind the main front. Then, ideally, link up with the advancing 8th Army.
Did it work? Did they achieve surprise?
They did achieve surprise initially. Rommel was completely focused on the main 8th Army thrust coming from the south. He seems to have critically underestimated the strength, and especially the offensive capability, of the replacement garrison inside Tobruk. He didn't expect them to attack outwards.
So the breakout began. How did it go?
The garrison launched a fierce, three-pronged attack out of the southeastern perimeter. The central assault was arguably the most costly and the most dramatic. It was led by the 2nd Battalion, the Black Watch.
A famous Scottish regiment. What was their objective?
They were tasked with seizing a heavily fortified German strongpoint, codenamed Tiger. It was vital ground needed to secure the base of the breakout corridor.
And it was tough going.
Incredibly tough. The sources describe it as a frontal, direct charge across open ground, straight into relentless machine gun fire. A desperate, brave dash. They took the objective, but the price was horrific.
Casualties.
The Black Watch suffered 201 casualties killed and wounded in that single action to take Tiger. Terrible cost. But once it was seized, General Scobie immediately ordered the position consolidated, and the push continued to widen the corridor out from Tobruk.
What was the ultimate link-up point they were aiming for?
The key terrain feature was the high ground along the Ed-Duda Ridge, which overlooked the main bypass road around Tobruk. That was the crucial rendezvous point.
And did they make it?
They did. After 6 days of absolutely ferocious fighting, pushing the corridor wider, beating off German and Italian counterattacks, trying to close the breach, the Tobruk garrison, elements of the 70th Division captured Ed-Duda Ridge on November 27th.
And the 8th Army.
They finally linked up. A small force of New Zealanders, part of the 8th Army advancing from the south, made contact with the Tobruk garrison on the ridge. The chains were finally broken after 231 long days.
An incredible moment. But Rommel didn't just pack up and leave, did he? Even with his position crumbling.
No. Rommel was nothing if not audacious, even when things looked bad. Even as the link-up happened, he didn't immediately order a general retreat. Instead, he attempted one last desperate gamble, the infamous dash to the wire.
What's that?
He gathered the remnants of the Africa Corps armor and launched them on this wild, high-speed thrust eastwards, back towards the Egyptian border of the wire.
Why? What was he hoping to achieve?
He hoped to sow chaos in the British rear areas. He perceived, maybe correctly, a gap or weakness in the regrouping British XXX Corps, and he gambled on smashing through them, disrupting their supply lines, and perhaps snatching a dramatic operational victory from the jaws of strategic defeat.
A massive gamble indeed, betting on pure maneuver when his logistics must have been screaming defeat already.
Totally, and it didn't really work. The dash to the wire largely fell on empty desert. The British were confused, yes, but Rommel didn't find and destroy a major formation. Critically, this maneuver bought the 8th Army the time it desperately needed to regroup, consolidate the link-up with Tobruk, and reorganize their own battered forces.
So Rommel's gamble failed.
It failed. When the depleted Africa Corps was finally forced to turn back towards Tobruk, Rommel made one last attempt to retake that crucial Ed-Duda Ridge on December 4th.
Yeah.
He was repulsed again by the tenacity of the British 14th Infantry Brigade, who were now holding the ridge alongside elements from the garrison. And at that point, reality finally bit.
Logistics again.
Logistics. Intelligence reports confirmed the supply situation was dire and wasn't going to improve significantly anytime soon. Maybe not until the end of the month, they told him. With his forces exhausted and outnumbered, Rommel finally decided he had to cut his losses. He abandoned the siege of Tobruk and ordered a withdrawal to the more defensible line further west at Gazala.
And the siege was officially lifted December 1941.
December 1941. It marked the first time in the war that German panzer units had been definitively stopped in a sustained operation. A huge moment, validating the incredible endurance of those defenders over 231 days. #H's legacy and cost.
So looking back, the strategic importance of holding Tobruk for those 7 long months, it really can't be overstated, can it?
No, it really can't. By denying Rommel that key forward supply port, the Allies fundamentally crippled his ability to sustain operations deep into Egypt. It forced him into that constant logistical crisis, which directly contributed to the 8th Army's eventual success in Operation Crusader.
It was proof that the Blitzkrieg, or at least Rommel's desert version of it, could be stopped, even under the absolute harshest conditions imaginable.
Exactly. It was a massive boost to Allied morale everywhere at a time when victories were scarce.
But the human cost of achieving that victory was immense. On both sides, but particularly for the defenders over that long period.
It was staggering. The Allied ground casualties inside Tobruk totaled nearly 6,000 men. 5,989 is the figure often cited.
And that breaks down how?
About 3,200 of those were Australians from the 9th Division and supporting units during the first most intense phase. And then another 2,150 or so were from the replacement forces, the British 70th Division, the Poles, the Czechs during the later stages in the breakout.
And the Axis losses attacking Tobruk.
They paid an even heavier price on the ground trying to take the fortress, while also struggling to maintain their forces those 1,100 miles from Tripoli. Total Axis ground casualties related to the siege efforts are estimated at over 12,296 is a common number. combining both German and Italian losses.
And that's just the ground troops. We have to remember the air and sea war, too.
Absolutely. The Axis lost somewhere between 74 and perhaps as many as 150 aircraft shot down over Tobruk or in related air battles.
And the Allied naval forces, the ferry service,
suffered grievously. Those 62 Allied ships sunk or damaged just keeping that vital lifeline open. A huge price in men and material.
But the legacy, the legend of the Rats of Tobruk endured.
It really did. Their successful active defense, that aggressive patrolling, the smart use of minefields, the hold-down anti-tank traps, the sheer refusal to yield it didn't just save the port. It genuinely shaped military thinking about how to defend isolated strongpoints for the rest of the war and beyond. So we've really traced the whole arc, haven't we? From the brutal desert conditions and the initial shock assaults, through the long months of grinding attrition on land, sea, and air, right up to that final dramatic breakout and link-up during Operation Crusader. The whole saga of Tobruk 41 is just an incredible testament to human endurance against, well, overwhelming logistical and tactical pressure.
It really is. And it leaves us with a pretty important question for you, the listener, to think about. Given those immense losses, especially the naval and air losses incurred just keeping the Tobruk ferry service running, not to mention the cost of the failed relief attempts like Brevity and Battleaxe, was the undeniable psychological and strategic victory of denying Rommel the port ultimately worth that heavy physical price paid by the Allied fleet and air forces?
That's a tough one. How much did the need to relieve Tobruk actually restrict wider British strategy in the Mediterranean throughout 1941? Could those resources have been better used elsewhere, perhaps?
And maybe a follow-up thought. If the original Rats of Tobruk developed such effective active defense tactics in 41 specifically, that clever use of pre-sighted artillery, integrated anti-tank defenses, minefields, why did Tobruk fall relatively quickly and disastrously to Rommel just a few months later, in June 1942? What crucial tactical lessons learned at such cost in 1941 seem to have been forgotten or ignored in 1942?
A very pointed question. It highlights how dramatically the fate of this small, dusty port could swing, and how it continued to influence the entire Desert War. Tough questions indeed.
Plenty to mull over there. That's it for this deep dive into your sources on the Siege of Tobruk. We'll see you next time.